Buenos dias. It's very quiet on my street right now. This is not technically tourist season here in Mazatlan, Mexico. That season is running from roughly December through April. So it's very quiet here. Mostly, this is a residential neighborhood. This is not party city. It's not like Cancun. It's a place where people live. Mexicans, Canadians, as I said before, plenty of Americans. And if you go around Mexico down here in Mazatlan as well as other parts of Mexico, and I've been to many of the states in Mexico, there's 31 states in Mexico. Just want to show you my beautiful pink trees, by the way, and my bicycles, which I don't have a car when I'm down here. I get around by bicycle and bus. If you go around on bicycle and bus, take taxis, just get out and about, you will find a lot of American media. For a start, you'll see a lot of bands that are playing down here, and they're playing American rock and roll. Yeah, like playing it really well. Like, of course, Carlos Santana and people like that who have Mexican heritage, but just regular flat-out rock and roll songs down here. And if you go to the movie theaters, there's tons of American films. They have them both in Spanish versions and also in English language versions. So you got that going on down here. And you see American products, right? They're a form of media. There's a big, bright red Coca-Cola truck that I see driving through the dusty streets of Mexico almost everywhere I go. So American media, those are just a few examples, are all over Mexico. And I start to think about some of the ideas that we talked about already as an intro for our class today, because we are going to talk about entertainment in North America, specifically from the United States. That's what we're focusing on, the US today. And isn't it cool? Isn't it cool that we started with Canada and we're going down on the world, so to speak, down from Canada to the US, and then our next country is actually going to be Mexico. How timely is that I'm here for that chapter? That'll be tomorrow. And then we're going down to Brazil. So try to think of this as kind of a North American experiment, including Brazil. You can look at maybe, or you want to look at Western Hemisphere. That's another way to look at it. So one of the reasons that I wanted to bring up all this entertainment that you see around Mexico is because along with that entertainment comes this idea that you may be changing values in another country, that you may be changing those values in ways that are not so good from that country's standpoint. Do you know about the holiday that's called Day of the Dead in Mexico? Do you know that holiday where they celebrate with figures like this? You've seen them, right? See the faces, dead faces. Here's one of Michael Jackson. I think it also looks like Steven Tyler of Aerosmith. You be the judge on that. Yeah, the Day of the Dead is an ancestral holiday in Mexico that has taken place across centuries, and it has a bunch of different dimensions to it. It ranges from remembering people who have passed away, family members and loved ones, but it also has to do with believing that they come alive. In fact, when they celebrate Day of the Dead, they actually put out whole buffets of food in Mexico and pretend as if the relatives who are deceased come back and eat that food. Okay, well, because of U.S. entertainment coming into Mexico so much, you find that Day of the Dead has started to merge with Halloween, a very also similar holiday that has some similar but very different themes as well. And the American Halloween is not so much about ancestors as much as it about being spooked and having fun, but it has a lot of the properties of Day of the Dead. So you find a lot of the values that are being imported along with TV shows that depict Halloween in the US, or commercials that have Halloween candy in Mexico, which you can find. You start to find those values being transmitted to the country that may be defending itself against this term cultural imperialism. And in this case, you find more people celebrating Day of the Dead with candy now, and with groups of young people going around asking for candy. It's become a completely different holiday in a way, and the merchandising of Halloween has gotten into Day of the Dead. And so that's what we're talking about here. Remember, when we're talking about media in any context in this class, we're talking about how it is really manufacturing values. And it's a manufacturing plant. You know, the Foxes and the Disneys and the ESPNs and AT&Ts and Verizon, they're not just manufacturing equipment and services, they're making values. All right, so we head into today's class. We're talking about Western media, specifically the United States, and the United States is just a Goliath. Do you know that term? Just a monster, not like scary monster. When it comes to entertainment media, it's a class all by itself across the world, as both an exporter, not so much as an importer, but as an exporter and a producer. In other words, not a lot of media content comes from other countries into the United States. We're going to be talking about why that is later on in the class. It's a fairly insular country where most people just test yourselves. How many French films have you seen, right? I'm sure there's people in the class that are saying none. And yet the French film industry is one of the most prolific and really interesting production industries that's put out some content that is fascinating. So we don't get that much coming into the United States. But the U.S. is a behemoth in terms of what goes out of the U.S. around the country, and also a behemoth, a Goliath, in terms of what we produce that is consumed within our country. So I thought it was interesting that the chapter started out by talking about the film Avatar. Avatar was a film that was launched that brought back 3 dimensions. 3D film was available before, and television, actually really old from the 1950s, some horror movies. But what happened after that was the most interesting thing to me, and that is afterwards Avatar went into discussions with Disney to incorporate the Avatar into the theme park, and they launched an event that is an Avatar event, or a show, I guess you could say, inside of Disney. And it's a good example of how the entertainment industry is constantly looking for new ways for alliances and to expand. And that really is much of what this chapter is about. It's about the constant expansion of U.S. entertainment media. But this is occurring within a period of consolidation. Consolidation is where contraction is going on. It's where fewer and fewer companies are owning more and more media properties, and positions are being eliminated. And we saw that in the pandemic. I have a very good friend who's a radio broadcaster in California. She's now broadcasting in 6 different markets that are part of the K-Frog radio network. It's a country radio network. She's going up and down the coast of California, basically from San Francisco down to California, and that's pretty rare. But what it does say is they've eliminated local hosts who are in San Francisco and Los Angeles, and now they're having one person do it. That's consolidation. A contraction has gone on. And basically what it means is only a handful of companies control most of the media content today. You can read some of the facts in the book. Some of the info is a little bit out of date, but the key signature idea here is that just a few players own like 90% of the content. Those few players, those big companies include internet companies today, the alphabets of the world. Well, I say alphabets of the world like there's a bunch of them. Now, there's only one. That's the parent company of Google, right? Increasingly producing content. So entertainment media in the United States, it continues to expand across platforms, industries, and borders, and that's what we're going to talk about here. And it does this through mergers and acquisitions and startup companies. Companies can start up small, like YouTube was a small company at one time before it was bought by Google. That's how companies begin. They start Instagram, bought by Facebook. Same thing, they start small, get bought up, and then there's mergers, acquisitions. It's going on all the time. I just read last week that AT&T is looking for a Department of Justice approval of a merger with Discovery so that it can become a rival streaming company, Discovery and AT&T, to rival Netflix and to rival Amazon Prime. This kind of thing is going on. It's dizzying the pace of these mergers, acquisitions, startups in the media industry. So when you look in the United States, this author for this particular chapter is choosing to focus mostly on film and television, and he focused early on how Disney acquired Fox, specifically so that it could gain access to Comcast satellites in Europe. So Disney acquired Fox, not all of Fox, just certain Fox content and certain access to satellite networks that Fox had available through the News Corporation, which also owns Sky Television, which is the same as our DirecTV in the United States. It's the satellite distributor in Europe, and that's why we saw this action take place, so that Disney could have a footprint to get into Europe. That kind of thing is going all the time, expanding. That's the theme of this chapter. And even within the sameness that exists out there, which is to say that all these companies are constantly trying to buy up things and get into producing TV, radio, online content, there's a lot of similarity, but each company is structured extremely differently. For example, one of the hardest relationships to follow is the one between Viacom and CBS. So CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System, started as a radio network, and it started as a network to advertise cigars. Yeah, William Paley, the guy who's founded the network, he owned a cigar business, Columbia Cigars. He wanted to advertise it, so he
bought a bunch of radio stations to advertise the cigar network. And then it grew with television, went into television, and it wanted to start a film production unit, so it started Viacom as this little small unit to produce films. And that unit became so popular and so wealthy that it actually ended up buying CBS. Yeah, Viacom bought CBS, so they say that the child ate the parent. And that's the kind of thing that's really strange and exciting when you look at media industries. Let's talk about platforms now, expanding across platforms. One of the relationships where we can see this happening is in film. So film can be originally released in theaters as a feature film, as feature films, and then they move over afterwards to digital device platforms like on your phone. You know, I mean, the amount of people watching films on their phones when I flew down to Mexico was probably half the plane. And those are films that are not new releases, right? But those are films that are available on their phones through various subscription services, or pirated films that they get a hold of, or YouTube films that are offered for free. In the United States, you may be surprised to know that this is the country that does not produce the most films across the world. You may think that we do. We are kind of egocentric when we think about ourselves. And many of us probably thought that English was the most spoken language in the world. It is not. In the cases here too, that the U.S. does produce a lot of films, 100 films a year or more coming out of Hollywood and other filmmakers. But a bigger producer, which we're going to study later on in the class, is actually Bollywood. In India produces more films. So those films go into theaters first, and then they go over to hotels and pay-per-view and physical discs, if anybody still watches films on DVDs today, and then streaming platforms. So when you release media content across platforms, sometimes it's staggered, right? It's not all at one time. There's a first release, a second release, a third release, and so on. And also we see TV content that used to be considered traditional terrestrial TV content. It had to be broadcast, right? It had to go through the airwaves, or then it had to be captured by a satellite company or a cable company like Blue Ridge in the Poconos. They have a big piece of property a big area on their property that's called the head end. It's full of antennas and satellite dishes. It's pulling in all the satellite programming from ESPN, etc., and then sends it back out on cable. So we had that as a way of spreading media content across platforms, but now we have TV content being available on digital streaming platforms. So Hulu, Amazon, Netflix, as all of you probably increased your viewing, at least in the early stages of the pandemic, we saw these kinds of platforms soaring in their use, and also their production of content. They're producing more content than ever. Netflix, the number of Netflix shows that are not owned by other shows is really proliferated, and they don't have to deal with copyright clearances either, getting permission to distribute those other people's content. But this also means that we have a lot of audience fragmentation because of all this expansion of U.S. entertainment media across platforms. We have very tiny niche-oriented audiences. I mean, I'm sure you know friends of yours who are on social media and they're just raving about a TV show. Everybody's got to watch this. This is the best show. You got to watch it. And still you don't, because that's their very, very tiny interest. Okay, Schitt's Creek. I know people are crazy about it. I watched like 15 minutes of it. I'm like, it's not for me. But that is for somebody. That's for a fragmented group, a smaller group in the audience, and that's what's going on. It makes competition harder in the U.S. media landscape. It makes making your business model viable. Producing content that's going to make money makes it harder. And then finally, we have syndication. You know what syndication is, right? That's when you can watch a TV show that was originally ran live on television, and now it's being sold to another network. One of the most popular syndicated TV shows is Seinfeld. That's been going on for many, many years. Friends. I just saw that they've announced a reunion for Friends. They're going to have a reunion television show. It's Dave Chappelle. He's syndicated. Originally on HBO, I think he was, and comedy has come over to Netflix. So syndication is at like a second run that's purchased by a network other than where it originally ran. Next, we're going to talk about the U.S. media entertainment industry expanding across industries. And so it's a natural, is it not, that if you're going to be in the business of media content, that there may be some other businesses that you might be in as well. And Disney knows that all too well, right? It's got all the rights to those characters, all the Disney characters, from Mickey Mouse on down to Cinderella. They have all those characters, none of which were written by people working for Disney. They're like fables from Denmark, and Disney has all the rights for them and the costumes and the characters that they have at their theme parks. And so Disney is kind of looked at as the company to expand across industries first. It did it in 1954. You can find Disney theme parks, in some major places across the world: France, China, Hong Kong, theme parks. Here in Mexico, there's a very rich billionaire. I guess that's redundant. He's a billionaire automatically. He's rich. His name is Carlos Slim, Slim, originally from Lebanon. He's a Mexican citizen. He owned Telcel. Telcel is a big cell phone company. It produces media content here in Mexico. And then he purchased an airline. And I flew on his airline, Volaris Airlines. It's a low-cost airline. Flew from JFK to Guadalajara, and that was 5.5 hours. And then Guadalajara to Culiacan, which is the capital of this state of Sinaloa. That was another 1.5 hours. And then a bus ride, 2.5 hours from Culiacan down here, all courtesy of Carlos Slim. It's an example of expanding across industries, not just staying within media industries. And 90% of you in this class probably have an Apple phone, 90% or more. And you already know that they are making not just Apple products like iTunes, but you're also holding an Apple phone made by Apple. It's a physical device that's made by this company. In general, expanding across industries is been fueled by the rise of big tech companies. So-called big tech companies are often referred to that way negatively in political campaigning, big tech. But the big ones are Alphabet, which I've already mentioned, which is the parent company of Google, Amazon. Can you name the other two? Can you name the other two? Apple is one, and Facebook. And really all of them, but mostly Facebook and Alphabet, they're not really media companies. They're advertising agencies. That's really what they are. They're advertising agencies, and all they're trying to do is to get you to input data on the web, because every keystroke that you type is being captured and then monetized. Every single keystroke, and people willingly do it. They're called prosumers when they do that. They're both producing content for Facebook and for Alphabet or Google, and they're also consuming it. And they're doing it for free, unbelievable as that is. In fact, I just wrote a chapter for a book on this subject. I'm going to send it out to you as an attachment. It's still in its draft form. It's been accepted by the publisher that speaks to this for those of you who are interested in this subject. I make some big claims in there, and the reviews so far and what people are reading, they're saying, wow. I mean, I'm not trying to say that I'm brilliant, but I think I've discovered something here with why people are on social media so much. So if you're interested in that question, I'd like you to read my chapter. Or let's go with the next idea, expanding across regulation. That's what we're talking about now. Regulation is actually the opposite. It's trying to curtail some expansion of media content, and we have agencies that do that. Their purpose is not necessarily to curtail, but that's what they end up doing. So in the U.S., we've got the FCC. We've got that's the Federal Communications Commission. We've got the Federal Trade Commission. That covers a lot of stuff with advertising and whether advertising is truthful or not, or whether certain products that are advertised, like energy drinks, are healthy for people. The FCC licenses radio stations. It controls when you say your legal identification, if you're a radio station at the top of the hour, the color that your tower must be painted. You have all these documents to send in every year. We've got the Department of Justice, already mentioned. They're reviewing that AT&T proposed merger with the Discovery online streaming platform. They review whether companies can come together, or whether it's going to create too much of a monopoly. So that's a regulatory body. And then we've got the U.S. Congress passing laws that you are or are not allowed to do certain things in the media. We have obscenity laws, actually some of those are FCC regulations, but we do have laws, case law related to what is considered to be obscene. You say fuck on American television, you say more than once, and you got a big problem on your hands, maybe a $300,000 fine, even though you don't see that across the rest of the world, as I've mentioned earlier. Now let's talk about the expansion of U.S. entertainment media across borders. So I mentioned earlier the example of, I did make a mistake, got to correct myself. Sorry, it's tough for me to keep up with the dizzying pace of mergers and acquisitions. Earlier I said that Disney acquired Fox to get a leg into Europe. That was wrong. Disney acquired the Fox Film and TV division to be in competition with Comcast, so I want to correct that. They acquired Fox, just the film and TV content, so that Disney could offer content that would compete with Comcast. So the company that did get into Europe was Comcast. Comcast acquired a stake in Sky Television. So in a way, what I said was still correct, that Disney got a footprint into Europe, but the larger issue that I want to make sure that I'm getting across here is the US market is finite, right? There are only so many people who are going to watch a film that's come out, or a television show, or buy something on iTunes, or or subscribe to Netflix. And so US companies, they need to reach elsewhere, which is to say other countries that are receptive to US media content. Not all countries are receptive to US media content. We have a hard time getting a lot of our content into China, for example, and many Middle Eastern countries. Very difficult to get the raunchier side of American programming in there. So companies look to expand through satellite platforms, cable platforms, internet platforms, to get into other areas. Warner Brothers, an American company, do a lot of production of television work and film, cartoons. Warner Brothers and films. Warner Brothers has a stake in Shed Entertainment, SHED Entertainment, in the United Kingdom. And Netflix, as we already discussed earlier, they do releases around the world. I thought it was interesting that I read that at one time they had 8,500 titles in the U.S. According to the chapter, 8,500, but in the UK they only had 3,000. That's more than 5,000 less titles in another country because of all those copyright permissions and fees and licensing fees that need to be arranged to distribute content. And that's why in Mexico I don't see the same Netflix necessarily that you're seeing. So this does now take us to wrapping up with some challenges that face the U.S. industry, and one is because of our country's size and our population, and also the way that people are spread out. The business model does call for you, as if you're going to be a successful media company, to reach an appropriate scale. That's the size and scope, and ultimately the size of the audience. And if you don't get that big, you're not going to go anywhere. Not everybody can be a Logan Paul or a Jake Paul. Not everybody can follow that path, or a Justin Bieber or a Jennifer Lopez. Not everybody can start small and then explode and become the appropriate scale. Most people fall off. I have a former student. She's been in the band The Love Zombies. She's been trying for years to reach that scale where she can actually support herself with their band, and she's still not able to do it. Living in Las Vegas now, still trying to use her website to promote her music, The Love Zombies. Check it out. All right, and then another challenge is the saturated audience that I mentioned earlier. There's a finite audience in the U.S., and it was kind of pleasing to me, not kind of, it was very pleasing to me to hear all of your introductions in this class. I'm very fascinated, and I find the mix of students in this class is going to be very interesting, and the level of thought process that went into those introduction videos is very impressive. But one of the things that I noticed is that many of you commented that because of the pandemic, you realize you got to get away from media. That you're doing too much, whether it's social media every morning, noon, and night, or binge watching got to get out, take a walk, got to get out, go for a run, got to get out, go for a drive, got to get out is something you talked about, and that's speaking to this idea that the audience is ultimately saturated, can be saturated in the U.S. You can't get any more water into the cup, right? So you got to go elsewhere to other countries. It's a challenge for U.S. media. And then finally, within the U.S. media industry, one of the biggest challenges is going to be streaming. Streaming is just going to increase. It's going to increase. It's going to challenge all of these so-called legacy media companies, the CBSs, et cetera, and they got to figure out what are they going to do. It's still not easy, right? Bandwidth still continues to be a problem. Downloading stuff that lags, that's a problem. Finding stuff that's free, I can tell you, I wanted to get on the airplane with plenty of films, but I don't want to go out and spend a bunch of money to download films that I may fall asleep while I'm watching, and there's just not a lot of free stuff out there. So the pipeline, so to speak, is not as free as it might be in the online streaming world, but we're only going to continue to see people accessing media content because it's so damn convenient on their phones and their laptops, and that means streaming is only going to increase. So that'll wrap up our conversation about the U.S. entertainment behemoth right here, well, right there where you are, most of you, I think anyhow, in the United States. Que tengo buen día.